Today we're talking about Google's EAT guidelines. Let's start with an overview. EAT stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And these are guidelines that play a role in a website's rank and authority. So over time, Google has gone through a bunch of iterations and changes to how they're ranking websites, and EAT is just one in a long line of those for us to learn about and consider as we optimize our sites and perform SEO. Let's talk about expertise first. So a few questions we want to ask ourselves when we're thinking about expertise is, are the page contributors or the authors experts in their field? Is their content truthful and helpful? And this is especially important for fields like medicine, finance, and law. Any field where somebody's life would be heavily affected, it's really important that the contributors are not just ghostwriters, but they're people who are authoritative to help with our accountability. Authoritativeness. Do you have credentials to produce this content? Are you certified? Do other people recognize your authority? Do others in your field recognize you as a professional? And much like expertise, in fields that have the possibility of affecting somebody's life, this is really important to make sure that the content isn't misleading them. So while you may be able to research any field and write on it, we want to make sure that the expertise and authoritativeness are coming from people who are well-studied, well-researched experts in their field, and they are recognized by other people as trustworthy sources. Speaking of which, trustworthiness. Can users trust your site? Especially, this is important for e-commerce sites. So do your users feel comfortable inputting their credit card number into your e-commerce site? Do they feel comfortable putting in their sensitive information to purchase something on your website? So something that's really important with trustworthiness is if your site has HTTPS or SSL certification. These are ways to show trustworthiness on your website. Okay, so as we discussed earlier, Google has gone through a bunch of different changes, and they're changing regularly all the time with their algorithms. So what is the big deal with EAT, and why bother adhering to these guidelines? Well, EAT is actually a pretty big deal. It determines how valuable your website is, how Google evaluates your page quality, and how users are going to digest what your site tells them. So these guidelines are especially important when it comes to the fields that affect a user's livelihood, as we mentioned previously. Google considers these or will distinguish them as YMYL, otherwise known as your money, your life. That is the type of information that if it is conveyed inaccurately or deceptively, they will directly affect the reader's well-being, including their happiness, their health, their safety, and their financial stability. So this is why it's so important that somebody who is an expert in their field, who is authoritative, trustworthy, is the one who is producing this amount of content, because they are not being deceptive to swindle people out of something that is important to their livelihood, but they're really truly informing them with the best practices within their field. So speaking of best practices, let's dig into those. When we're thinking about EAT guidelines, something to keep in mind is transparency. So in order for your readers to recognize who is the person who is creating their content and for them to vet its trustworthiness, or for Google even to do this, you want to include the author's names and bio in their editorial content. So in doing this, we want to include their credentials so the readers know where the information is coming from. So if they have any degrees or certifications or important titles, these authorial attributions really help hold content creators accountable for the information they put out into the world, so that we know it's coming from so-and-so rather than a blog that has no authorial credit given to the person who created the blog. Concerning your EAT score, it is subject to suffering if this information is difficult to find. So if your reader can't find out who wrote your article and they can't do some of their own personal research and you're making it difficult for them to find, this is something that will negatively impact how your site is scored. Social media is another good way because you can interact with users, you can post consistently, and in doing this, you can tell your brand story. The more you're interacting with your users, the more relevant, or the more you interact with your users and with other people, the more opportunity you have to share your story with relevant and trusted profiles. This helps to establish you as a thought leader in your industry because you're in conversation with people who are setting the tone for your industry. So something to keep in mind is to make sure your social media, you aren't just posting to your platform, but you are seeking out other people who users trust and who users have faith in. And in interacting with them, you are positioning yourself as somebody trustworthy and somebody that users can put their faith into. Quality backlinks. So something you want to do is develop a backlink portfolio from relevant industry or niche sites and disavowing low quality backlinks. One way to do this is to review your existing backlink profile. You want to disavow anything spammy or low quality. So go to those sites and check them out if they've got a lot of weird ads or if the website is just looking suspicious. These are things that you want to consider maybe low quality or spammy and disavow them. In their place, pursue new quality backlinks to add to your portfolio. Another best practice as you are developing your EAT score is to remove posts that you have with low EAT scores. So generally speaking, your traffic may decrease, but the overall impact is that it's going to improve your EAT score, which is going to benefit your website as a whole. You can optimize and edit low EAT content, which will conserve the traffic that you have coming to those pages and also just improve the content generally. Something you can do is have experts rewrite those pages so that you have that authoritative writer who is revamping that content too. The next thing you want to consider is creating user-focused content. So generate content that improves the lives of your readers. It's not enough that your content is informational, but it is ascertaining and it is reaching your users' search intent. So as you are reading, consider these questions. Does your post answer the reader's questions? If it doesn't, then it's not reaching that intent. How does this relate to a reader on a personal level? If they read your content and they have no takeaways, then your content is not reaching their search intent. Is it easy for the reader to take the next steps? Are you providing those next steps? Are you giving them insights as to how to evaluate what their next steps might be? If the answer is no, then you want to take the steps to make sure that you are doing those things for your readers. Here are some other considerations to keep in mind. Add some images, videos, and other visuals to help illustrate things to the readers. Some people are quite visual. And so having another way to digest the content by way of image or video or infographic can help really bring home takeaways to your readers. Personalize your content by adding real-life examples and anecdotes. So if you are an authority in your field, it might be helpful to reflect on your own personal practice so that they have an application that is related to your content, but gives them something a little bit more personalized to take away. Finally, if you are an expert, take a stance on your post and provide actionable steps. Being an authority gives you the leeway to be able to speak as EAT suggests, authoritatively on your subject. So if you have the authority to give a stance, take that stance and provide your reader with sources. Include other people within your industry who have taken a stance so that your opinion is within the community of experts. And those are EAT guidelines. Thanks.